It is the 25th day of September, the year 2014. A very good evening to you and welcome to the most comprehensive bulletin in the country. My name is Wilson Buru and this is KTN Prime.
Yes, we're glad you could join us. I'm Nancy Kachingira and our sign language interpreter is William Silla. Today we bring you that potentially landmark ruling where a nurse has been sentenced to death for an abortion gone wrong. That and more is coming up right now on KTN Prime. Let's take a look at that and other headlines first.
We begin tonight with what could go down as a landmark ruling on Kenya's abortion law.
Yes, earlier today, a 41-year-old nurse was sentenced over an abortion that went terribly wrong.
Jackson Namunya Tali was accused of murder after a woman he administered an abortion to died together with the fetus.
Here's Edith Kimani beginning our coverage tonight.
41-year-old Jackson Tali wears a poker face as he walks into the courtroom. In a few minutes, Justice Nicholas Ombija will decide his fate, having been accused of killing Christina Tieno and her unborn child in 2009. For a brief second, Tali manages a smile, all before Justice Ombija delivers an historic ruling. The accused person has been proven guilty beyond any reasonable doubt, the judge begins. He has killed two people, a fetus and her mother, and the only sentence available in law is a maximum death penalty, which I hand down to him. Jackson tosses a glance at the cameras, and that is the only reaction we see from him. The journey to this point began on 27th July 2009, when a young and newly pregnant Christina Tieno visited Kibera Sub-District Hospital in Gashie, where Jackson worked as a medical officer. She reportedly asked for an abortion, and it is at this point that the narrative changes. Jackson claims Christine came to him having already procured a botched abortion in a different facility 8 days prior, causing her to bleed out and die. Justice Ombija was, however, not convinced. Against the backdrop of evidence as to who interfered with the fetus that led to overbleeding was a fact within the accused's knowledge, Justice Ombija continued. Only he could explain how the deceased, who visited the clinic while well and not bleeding, happened to overbleed, culminating into her demise. Jackson's case and sentence is the first to come to a logical conclusion. Dr. John Nyamu is the only other medical practitioner to have been charged with murder in an abortion-related case after 15 fetuses were found on the road and allegedly linked to his clinic in 2004. The case was, however, thrown out and ruled improper. For Jackson, however, the next 14 days will be crucial, as this is his window to file for an appeal. But looking at his face, it is hard, if not impossible, to tell what his next move will be in this landmark judgment that could redefine abortion law in the country. Edith Kimani, KTN.
Let's go to a totally different court now, and President Uhuru Kenyatta has now asked the International Criminal Court to excuse him from attending the status conference scheduled for October 8th.
Yes, through his lawyer, Stephen Kay, the president wants the court to consider what he calls his extraordinary duties as president, since he will be attending a regional summit in Uganda on the exact date set aside for his status conference.
Now, if the court is unable to excuse him from physically being present, the president is asking the judges to postpone the status conference to a later date, but even then he wants to appear via a video link.
The president argues that the 2 to 3 days required to travel and attend the conference at The Hague will interfere with his duties as the head of state, adding that he will only play a passive role in the status conference anyway.
Trial Chamber 5 judges have asked that President Uhuru Kenyatta be physically present for the status conference after his trial date was postponed indefinitely. The prosecution accuses his government of non-cooperation.
Well, still on the president, in New York this time, he did address the 69th session of the UN General Assembly, where he warned that terrorism in Kenya could undermine democracy.
The Ebola crisis underlies the imperative to build strong states that can withstand crisis and respond to emergencies. State weakness in many African countries comes from a history of development paradigms and practices that weaken the state. We must commit to build strong, resilient, and accountable states that can effectively respond to shocks, adversities, and emergencies in the future.
Stop politics now, and the Council of Governors is now threatening to back a move to suspend Makueni County if the wrangles there will not end. The council says it will lead a final push to reconcile the county leadership, but warns that suspension will be the only option left if the efforts fail. Ashamwilu has the update.
As police further their probe into the Makueni County gun drama, the Council of Governors is taking the bull by its horns.
Guns are now being used. People shooting themselves. This is unprecedented. It has never been heard of anywhere else.
Chairperson Isaac Ruto says the Council of Governors is ready to take drastic measures.
We will be discussing these issues in the Council of Governors meeting next week, Monday. These are the options that are available, that is arbitration, and if arbitration is completely unable to yield results, this may be one of the issues that are of an extraordinary nature that may require the invocation of Article 192.
According to Article 192 of the Constitution, the President may suspend a county government either in an emergency arising out of external conflict or war, or in any other exceptional circumstances.
You cannot continuously hold the people of Makueni at ransom. 1 year, they did it last year. They want to do it this year. And this year, as if that is not enough, they even want to shoot the governor. Maybe, I mean, really, if that is not an exceptional situation, I don't know what exceptional situations would become.
The Council of Governors raised one particular issue of concern that is threatening development in Makueni County.
Out of a budget of 376 million, the County Assembly of Makueni has already utilized 174 million since the beginning of the financial year.
Makueni Governor Kivutha Kibwana has already declared that he will hand over his county government to the national government if the arbitration efforts fail.
To take back this government to the people. We tell them that you elected us, thank you very much. We can't work together because there are people who are stopping us from working together. We would like this county government suspended so that you can have fresh elections after 90 days.
5 people were badly injured in a gunfight at the Makueni County Assembly during a confrontation between members of the Assembly and residents led by the governor. If Makueni County fails to clean up its house, it could face suspension and all its elected members be forced to seek fresh mandate from the voters. Ashamwilu, KTN.
Well, as Makueni County tries to sort out its issues elsewhere, the opposition coalition court is now threatening to discipline governors who won't toe the referendum line. And as Patrick Amimo reports, the Okoa Kenya initiative has agreed to zero in on 2 or 3 pertinent issues for the referendum question. The question that, I beg your pardon, for the referendum question that remains elusive to date.
The CORD leaders converged at the Bomas of Kenya to review progress made so far in referendum push. The coalition has not formulated specific questions for the proposed referendum, but they say it will focus on 5 issues. Devolution, land reforms, electoral reforms, ethnic inclusivity in public appointments, and strengthening of public institutions and constitutional commissions. On devolution, the coalition's committee of experts proposes to increase county revenue allocation from the current 15% to 45% of all revenue collected by the national government. 40% of the monies shall be allocated to counties, while the remaining 5% will go to a ward fund.
And our proposal is that money should be allocated depending on the previous year's revenues. So we would look at what the national government received last year, and on that basis, allocations would be done for the current year.
There must be mechanisms to allow for immediate release of this money in the new financial year, just like it's done to the national government.
Wanatumia ofisi ya control of budget na auditor general to blackmail the counties and make them look like they're failing. We want to see a proper system where the distribution and disbursement of money is determinate.
Okoa Kenya also wants the constitution amended to provide for what it calls proper procedures for the impeachment of governors and their deputies. Provide for a definite percentage of sharing of revenues from mineral, oil and gas resources between national and county governments. Expand time limits for dealing with the presidential petitions and ensuring that no ethnic community has more than 15% share of appointments to public service in the national government and its agencies.
We'll be taking a very serious risk if we loaded the referendum with so many issues which the people may not understand. My humble proposal is that we must restrict ourselves to 2 or 3 pro-people issues.
Let's not take questions to the referendum that will boomerang by giving those who are spreading propaganda and rumors, cheap rumors, to appear like they are talking sense. Let's refine and define and take 2, 3 questions that capture the imagination, the vision, and the dreams of Kenyans.
And even here, they insisted that their call is not political.
In providing for amendments, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 does not label any such effort as an attempt to overthrow or to slow down the government or to take over power through the back door. This is not a contest between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. This is not a test of might or popularity between CORD and Jubilee. Nor is it an attempt to revive or to end the political careers.
The CORD leadership has launched a united front to ensure an aggressive civic education exercise is carried out on its referendum agenda at the grassroots. The leadership is emphatic that this is not a supremacy battle between CORD and Jubilee. Patrick Amimo, KTN at the Bombas of Kenya, Nairobi.
Let's move away from politics to some domestic issues and a follow-up of that story of a pastor and a woman in a hotel room.
Well, the Anglican Church says it has now formally launched investigations into the incident.
Archbishop Eliud Wabukala says the church does not condone such behavior and that action will be taken against the priest if he is found guilty.
He spoke as the other man in the saga came out to dismiss claims that it was a setup.
Here's Ian Wafula with a story.
The question on the clergy's moral high ground by the society was brought to the attention of Anglican Church of Kenya's top leadership. Just a day after a pastor affiliated to the church was caught in a compromising position with a woman said to be somebody's wife.
Ni jambo ambalo linashughulikiwa kulingana na taratibu za kanisa. It's always important that we respect the word of God as given to us in the Bible. We should not ask people change the Bible in order to suit us. The Bible is there to judge us, to correct us, and also to encourage us.
And at the center of the drama, the man who says he caught the pastor sleeping with his wife made way to KTN's offices to make what he called clarifications. First, that strange smile on the woman's face that could hardly be explained in the midst of blows and kicks. According to Julius, the woman is his ex-wife, but one he still supports because they have a 10-year-old son.
Inaweza kuwa wajaanzana juzi, mimi ndo nimejua juzi. Inaweza kuwa mpaka mtoto ni wake. Inaweza kuwa si wako juana na pasta juzi. Unajua inaweza kuwa msichana anachukua pesa pande kwa pasta na bado anachukua pesa kwangu.
Our attempts to reach both the pastor and the woman in question were futile as both of their phones went unanswered. But Julius' father denies any claims of a setup.
Mwambia kanisa nikikwambia nitakudanganya. Juu hata sijui walijuania wapi.
However, both Julius and the pastor recorded statements at Kasarani police station where investigations into the incidents have begun alongside those by the Anglican Church.
let's go back to that top story that we had for you tonight, and it is about a landmark ruling in Kenya's abortion law. Earlier today, a 41-year-old male nurse was sentenced over an abortion that went terribly wrong.
Yes, Jackson Namunyatali was accused of murder after a woman he administered an abortion to died together with the fetus. Now, this is something that definitely brings into sharp focus the question of abortion and the law. And in this case, the highest penalty was exacted, a death sentence. In studio with us now is John Allen Namu. John, can you put this into context for us in terms of what the law says and what this sentence means?
I mean, it's very confusing for a lot of people who think that the death penalty was abolished in Kenya. But if you look to the history of Kenya and the death penalty, then it starts to get a bit more clear about why it's so confusing and why this is going to be a big debate. But perhaps first we should go into that history. In the 50s and the 60s, or rather in the 50s, between 1952 to 1959, the emergency period, lots of hangings perpetrated by the colonial government. But that changed, of course, after independence. Going forward to 1982, after the coup, Hezekiah Ochuka and Pancras Oteo were convicted. And in 1987, Hezekiah Ochuka and Senior Private Pancras Oteo were executed. But this was between a period of change in terms of the death penalty. Lots of laws were being implemented and lots of laws were being passed at the international level and domesticated here. And in the push for democracy and change and civil rights, when President Mwai Kibaki came into power in 2003, which you'll see in my next slide, in 2003, the scope of the death penalty was restricted to murder and rape from treason as well as robbery with violence. That was a huge change for the death penalty in terms of how it was perceived. Of course, people who are being tried for treason and robbery with violence would no longer be liable to be convicted of the death penalty, but it wasn't completely scrapped. That's something that people get confused quite a bit of the time. Of course, Mwai Kibaki in that year also commuting quite a number of sentences, about 195 thereabouts, and going forward into 2010, before the new constitution was promulgated, he commuted 4,000 more death sentences, and the convicts who were facing the death penalty, of course, would now serve a life sentence. That had a huge impact later on, but an interesting ruling here that's going to confuse a bit of what's happening today was made in 2010 in July thereabouts. Godfrey Mutiso versus the Republic of Kenya. Godfrey Mutiso, of course, not very well known to the public. He murdered somebody between 2008 2009. He was charged and tried and convicted of murder, sentenced to death. But he appealed. He appealed on the basis of a lot of the laws that we had already domesticated, laws like the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, the International Covenant on Civil Rights and Political Rights, all of which abolish or do not include the death penalty. And that quote that you see down, the quote that should be coming up on our screens right now, the automatic nature of the death penalty in Kenya for murder violates the right to life and amounts to inhumane punishment. Now, based on the ruling today, that might not be as landmark as a lot of people think it is, especially if Jackson, the nurse, who was convicted of murder today, takes this to the Court of Appeal. There already is precedent for the overturning of a death sentence here in Kenya. Of course, now 2014 shows you the situation that we're in, a bit of a conundrum that we're balancing here. So many people who are on the death row, about 6,000 people, according to Death Row Project, which is a human rights website that follows the abolition as well as the upholding of the death row worldwide. 6,000 death row convicts in Kenya. That's the fourth largest in the world. So what do we do with the people who are on death row? Do we continue to use, especially in the context of murder and rape of minors, do we continue to use the death penalty and hang some of these people, or do we abide by our human rights obligations and commute these sentences, perhaps even reduce some of these sentences and have them serve life sentences? That's something that we're going to be seeing a lot in coming days, Nancy and Wilson.
All right, some very interesting information there. We have more death row convicts than even the United States. But the last hanging was carried out in the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s. Okay. Of course, since 2009, when the hangman died, the post of the hangman hasn't been filled. So it sort of looks like we're going in one step towards a more human rights approach to murder, capital offenses, rather than hanging them as we used to in the 50s and, of course, in 1987.
Let's now go to the story of a legacy that lives on 3 years later.
Earlier today, nature lovers gathered at the historic Karura Forest to mark the 3rd anniversary of the passing of Professor Wangari Maathai.
The late Nobel laureate is remembered as a passionate fighter for the environment and for peace.
Sharon Mumanyi looks back on her life from the eyes of those charged with carrying on her legacy.
A mood of celebration rather than sadness is one that filled the air at the memorial ceremony today. Family, friends, leaders and environmentalists sharing the late Wangari Maathai's green vision gathered at the Wangari Maathai Corner in Karura Forest today, marking the 3rd anniversary of her demise. And what better way to commemorate her than to plant a tree?
Here is this woman who was a trailblazer and a mentor for me in so many ways.
Wangari Maathai is a name living beyond her death.
We are going to shed blood because of our land. We will. We are used to that. Our forefathers shed blood for our land. We will do so.
With that blood and tears, she fought to conserve the environment. Her most notable battles were halting the construction of a 60-story complex in Uhuru Park and protecting parts of the Karura Forest from being grabbed by private developers.
When he was fighting them, he came along with some seedlings to plant in this area. And those are some of the trees you are seeing, the big ones you are seeing there. Those are the trees which were planted on that day, and he was assisted by the community of Oroma.
The struggle is still on, although it is not as complicated as it used to be before, because now the laws are in place. Even though there are people who even currently who are not ready to follow the right procedure, I think it takes time for people to change from the old way of doing things to adopt a new way of doing things.
In her honor, the Kenya Forest Service and the Green Belt Movement put up the Wangari Maathai Memorial at the very place she saved from land grabbers in Karura Forest.
Just the way Wangari was respected before she passed on, that respect is still there. And we find it easy because all we need to do is just to carry her legacy.
In 2004, Professor Wangari was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for her contribution to sustainable development, democracy and peace. The Green Belt Movement, a tree planting movement formed by Maathai in 1977, is still advancing her vision of a sustainable environment which would create a source of living for communities.
Of course, there have been a few changes, like redefining our focus, but ensuring that we do not move from her legacy. Just redefining and ensuring that, we are expanding, and our objective of conserving the environment is actually doing that in this day-to-day.
Whenever we have an activity in the forest, we have to engage them instead of going far to bring people to come and do that work, like the ones you have seen they are working. Whenever we have a casual labor like tree planting or weeding or maintenance of what we have planted, we have to engage the casuals from the community.
Professor Maathai died of complications arising from ovarian cancer while receiving treatment at a Nairobi hospital on 25th of September 2011 at the age of 71. The vision that the late Professor Wangari Maathai had was one of a sustainable environment, one which benefited the livelihoods of communities. 3 years after her demise, and joint efforts by environment stakeholders are ensuring that her legacy remains unbowed. Sharon Mumanyi for KTN in Karura Forest, Nairobi.
Now, ever heard of the phrase, size doesn't matter? Well, it does, apparently, according to researchers at the University College of London. A new study now suggests that the size of a woman's skirt can determine if she is at risk of breast cancer. KTN's Catherine Omwando explains how.
Women Women, have you gone up a skirt size or two in the last 10 years? If yes, then you may be at risk of postmenopausal breast cancer. Don't believe it? Here's why you should. A new study released just this week suggests that if a woman increases in skirt size every 10 years, their chances of getting postmenopausal breast cancer increases by 33% with every increase, while an increase of 2 sizes every decade means a 77% rise in risk.
I think using dress sizes and skirt sizes is actually something that we can all relate to. Yeah. Instead of using indexes that sometimes are hard to interpret, because when I tell you my dress size is this and I've increased from this to that, it's indicative of what exactly I'm talking about, where exactly has the weight increased.
The study in a British medical journal was conducted by Dr. Usha Menon and her colleagues at the Gynecological Cancer Research Centre at University College London. The researchers followed 92,834 postmenopausal women for more than 3 years. At the beginning of the study, the women were asked for their heights and weights, as well as lifestyle and reproductive histories, and what skirt size they were in their 20s. In case you're wondering, issues like pregnancies, smoking, drinking habits, and family histories of breast cancer were factored in. And the results revealed 1,090 women of the 92,000 did indeed develop breast cancer. It's 1.2%, but it's significant.
So we're not saying all obese people will develop breast cancer, or everyone who has gained a certain amount of weight will develop breast cancer, but it is known to be a predisposing factor.
What the researchers were looking for is fat around the stomach and its direct relation to breast cancer. They say the fat around the stomach is metabolically more active than fat found anywhere else on the body.
The fat around the abdomen produces certain substances, an enzyme called aromatase, which enables estrogen to be produced in another part of the body other than the ovary. Now, high levels of estrogen are actually a risk factor for developing breast cancer.
So if you were a size 10 in your 20s and now 14 in your 30s, you may need to consult your doctor. Besides that, the authors of the study urge women to reduce their weight. Of course, if you're in your 60s and you used to wear a size 10 mini skirt in your 20s, getting back to the good old days may not be so easy. However, the researchers say you need to get back to wearing the skirt you used to wear when you were going through menopause. That is by cutting out some pounds. And if you're in your 20s and still rocking that size 10, then try and keep it that way throughout your life. And if you're not in your 20s and not a size 10, Menon and her colleagues urge you to keep your weight as low as possible before you hit menopause. Catherine Omwando, KTN.
Kenya is just 4 days away from becoming a middle-income nation. Well, at least statistically, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics will on Tuesday release new GDP data that is likely to see the economy grow by 20% from the current 4.3 trillion shillings. But what exactly will change come Tuesday? And more curiously, is it really necessary? KTN's Adelaide Chungole tells us more.
Mark the date, September 30th. This is the day that Kenya will announce the results of the first statistical review of its economy in over 20 years. The review, commonly referred to as rebasing, is expected to see the size of Kenya's economy jump significantly.
Would say the sort of mid-20 type of number. That's way below the 50s, 60s, which we were looking at in the West Africa.
The review will change how the economy is calculated, with new sectors making a debut in the matrix. Among the new sectors expected to now feature prominently is a mobile telephony sector.
Mobile phone financial transactions comprise about 31% of the GDP.
However, most of the old sectors like tourism and transport will still remain, and agriculture will likely retain its crown as the key driver of the economy.
Ag will continue to be the dominant sector because it just is the dominant sector.
The review will bring good tidings to the government, which has been under pressure to reduce its debt burden. Currently, the country's debt amounts to 2.37 trillion shillings, representing 57% of GDP. But once the rebasing is done, this level will fall automatically.
GDP to deficit will come down. GDP to current account deficit will come down. They will all come down.
rebasing the GDP naturally allows you to borrow a little bit more without necessarily having to go and change that particular policy target.
However, the rebasing is a double-edged sword. Although the country will have bragging rights, it could lose access to the loans and aid that have been extended to Kenya due to its poor status. On the flip side, however, having a bigger economy makes the country a more attractive destination for foreign direct investment, which would accelerate development. Interestingly, Kenya is not the only country in East Africa that thinks having a bigger economy trumps being poor.
Tanzania is releasing their rebasing on the Tuesday as well. No, so we'll obviously want to see how they get on.
Adelaide Changole, KTN Business.
Central Bank has directed all commercial banks to talk the talk and provide affordable long-term funding to spur economic development. According to the CBK, Kenya's ambitions to attain a growth target of 10% will remain an illusion if banks maintain the high interest rate regime. Speaking at the annual Banking Research Conference, CBK Governor Njuguna Ndung'u challenged lenders to be ready and willing to provide long-term finance with attractive terms. The private sector has over the years been recognized as the engine for economic growth, employment creation and poverty reduction, but lack of cheap credit has made it difficult to keep up with the momentum. Consistent with Vision 2030, the government is expected to contain growth in total expenditures to levels consistent with sustainable debt and gradually reduce domestic debt to create fiscal space through reduced interest payments.
Must intermediate and provide the funding required for investment. And even more importantly, provide long-term finance with attractive terms for the private sector to take up.
Kenya might soon not need to borrow heavily for development projects, but will rather reinvest the savings mobilized through the National Social Security Fund. With the NSSF Act likely to drive savings up to 10 billion shillings a month, the fund says it will be possible and in position to finance the government while making market-beating returns for pensioners. Here now, KTN's Charles Gitonga explains how NSSF is banking its 5-year strategic plan to drive development.
Kenya's economy is at an exciting phase of its development path with various projects in the pipeline. But with the capital-intensive nature of these projects, the government is forced to source these expensive funds to finance them. The National Social Security Fund may just hold the key to cheaper financing. With the enactment of the NSSF Act and implementation of its 5-year plan, the fund hopes to collect as much as 10 billion shillings, mobilizing funds it could lend to the government and generate returns for savers.
The money we go to borrow from other countries is money citizens in those countries have actually saved.
The 5-year corporate strategic plan, which is anchored on the new NSSF Act, will grow the value of the national fund from the current 150 billion shillings to 526 billion shillings. This will be through increasing membership to 3.8 million Kenyans from the current 1.5 million, raising the annual contributions to 118 billion shillings from 7.8 billion shillings, and realigning its governance structure. The roadmap also stipulates how the fund should play its rightful role in the lives of Kenyans through prudent management and monitoring, even as it becomes a key platform to raise resources for investment.
Every Kenyan contributor or potential contributor will want to hold the management and board of NSSF with the highest integrity and responsibility.
With the money lent to the government, NSSF hopes to generate huge returns and increase interest on savings from the current 12%, giving pensioners something to smile about. Charles Gitonga, KTN.
And Kenya Ports Authority is set to give incentives to traders to boost exports to improve locally made products sold out of Kenya. Kenya, being the regional power, still relies heavily on imports like machinery, transport equipment, motor vehicles, metals, plastics, electrical equipment, and less on exports. Horticulture produce, tea, coffee, fish, and cement remain the major items of export for Kenya, accounting for only 10% of the total export volumes, leaving a lot to be desired in the exports industry. Traders are now being encouraged to fill up the 500 export vessels at the port for better trade. The UK is the largest export partner of Kenya, followed by the Netherlands, Uganda, Tanzania, the US, and Pakistan.
We want them to incur less charges, make it as efficient as possible for them to reach their proposed destinations.
Spectators purchase tickets in advance as opposed to acquiring them at the host venue is part of Kenya's bid to impress the International Rugby Board. Kenya is among the new countries bidding to host one of the IRB World Series legs in 2016. And it is in that spirit that the Kenya Rugby Union and sponsor Safaricom want to emulate the professionalism approach the IRB carries out most of its events. Security heads in Nairobi County have ensured that those wishing to attend the 3-day extravaganza, that security will be tight. Kenya Shujaa has been placed in Pool A as Simba Saba is in Pool B with Spain and Samurai. Pool C has Kenya Morans and the Welsh Warriors, while Pool D has neighbors Uganda, Argentina and Western Province. The 18th edition of the annual Safaricom Sevens kicks off on Friday, but action proper starts on Saturday morning and ends on Sunday. Victor Ogale, KTN Sport.
Let's go to football, where Tusker failed in their bid to pile more pressure on second-placed Sofapaka after losing to Ulinzi Stars in the only Premier League match played today. The Brewers lost 2-1 to Ulinzi Stars at the Afraha Stadium in Nakuru. After being held to a 1-1 draw by City Stars over the weekend, Tusker needed to up their game, but they found themselves on the back foot courtesy of Evans Amwoka, who headed the opener. Tusker coach Francis Kimanzi. Kimanzi's pep talk in the changing room inspired the Brewers, who replied soon after the restart. Ismail Dunga then drilled in a long shot following a build-up with Kevin Kimani. Tusker's next game will be against Mathare United. Now, the organizers of the annual Baringo Half Marathon have doubled the winner's prize money. A new category for schools has also been introduced. Elsewhere, slight changes have been made on the 6th and Dalat Ga Kids cross-country races.
More than 5,000 runners are expected at the 6th edition of the Ndalat Ga Kids cross-country meeting in Nandi County on October 11th. The traditional elite races have been reduced by 2 kilometers. The men, juniors and seniors will contest in 6 kilometers and 10 kilometers instead of 8 kilometers and 12 kilometer races, while women categories will feature 4 kilometers and 6 kilometer races. The Ndalat Ga event curtain raises the cross-country season as athletes focus on the 41st World Cross-Country Championships set for China early next year. Elsewhere, the 13th edition of the Baringo Half Marathon is expected to attract more participants after the organizers increased the winner's prize money from 150,000 to 300,000 Kenya shillings. A 6 kilometers race was included to benefit school-going children. Schools interested in participating are required to enter a team of 10 athletes.
Schools to register as many teams as possible because these are what are going to go for these children.
Outstanding performers will be selected to join an all-sponsored athletic program where their talents will be nurtured.
I'm looking in terms of to see to it that we encourage, we motivate them so that they can be able to come up and take up sports in a bigger way.
ABC Bank will be sponsoring the event for the second year in a row. Lane Washira, KTN Sport.
And that's it.